In August 1980, a family camping trip near Uluru in Australia's Northern Territory turned into one of the most infamous tragedies in Australian history. Michael and Lindy Chamberlain, along with their three children, Aidan, Reagan, and 9-week-old Azaria, were enjoying a few days of adventure in the Australian outback. But what started as an ordinary family outing quickly spiraled into a nightmare that would grip the nation for decades. One night during the trip, Lindy Chamberlain discovered that her infant daughter, Azaria, was missing from the family's tent. What came next was a frantic search through the campsite, but there was no sign of the baby. Through tears and desperation, Lindy told authorities the unimaginable. She said a dingo, a wild Australian dog, had taken her baby from the tent. At first, the local medical examiner accepted Lindy's account of the tragic event. But things quickly took a turn when other authorities became suspicious. Could a dingo really have done such a thing? Was Lindy telling the truth, or was there something more sinister at play? As the investigation unfolded, Lindy found herself at the center of a media frenzy, and public opinion began to shift. Speculation ran wild, fueled by skepticism and mistrust. The authorities, convinced that something didn't add up, arrested Lindy and charged her with the murder of her own daughter. Despite the lack of a body and the unusual circumstances, Lindy was convicted and sent to prison for life. The grief-stricken mother was now branded as a murderer, all while the real question, what happened to Azaria, remained unanswered. For years, Lindy sat in prison, maintaining her innocence, while the world debated the truth. The mystery surrounding Azaria's disappearance was the subject of countless headlines, television debates, and even a Hollywood movie. The phrase "a dingo's got my baby" became a part of pop culture, but for Lindy and her family it was no laughing matter. It was their tragic reality. Then, in 1986, everything changed. A tourist fell to their death while hiking on Uluru, and during the search for their body, an astonishing discovery was made. Near a dingo den, searchers found the very dress Azaria had been wearing the night she disappeared. It was tattered and torn, but unmistakably hers. This discovery validated Lindy's story in a way that no courtroom ever could. A dingo had indeed taken Azaria. The revelation led to Lindy's immediate release from prison, but it took decades more for full justice to be served. In 2012, after years of inquiries and investigations, Azaria's death certificate was officially amended. It now stated what Lindy had known all along: Azaria had died as a result of a dingo attack. The Chamberlain case is one of the most tragic examples of how public opinion and flawed legal systems can wrongly convict an innocent person. For years, Lindy Chamberlain bore the weight of a nation's doubt, all while grieving the loss of her baby daughter. Even though Azaria's body has never been found, the truth finally came to light. This case continues to be a sobering reminder of how easily a person's life can be turned upside down by assumptions, misinterpretations, and the court of public opinion. Now let's talk about another event that happened on August 2nd, 1947. The skies over South America held a mystery that would baffle the world for decades. A plane named the Stardust, operated by British South American Airways, took off from Buenos Aires, Argentina, bound for Santiago, Chile. The flight seemed routine, until the moment it vanished without a trace. Everything was going smoothly until the final minutes before the plane was supposed to land in Chile. Then a strange signal came through from the Stardust's pilot, a series of Morse code signals that spelled out one puzzling word: Stendek. The pilot sent this message not once, but 3 times, and then silence. The plane, along with its 11 passengers and crew, was never heard from again. You can imagine the shock and confusion that followed. What happened to the Stardust? How could a plane simply disappear in the air? And of course, the question that still baffles experts today: what did Stendek mean? The mysterious message triggered a wave of speculation. Was it some sort of emergency signal, a garbled transmission, or maybe even an anagram of the word descent, indicating the plane's final moments? But none of these explanations seemed to fit. Some even went as far as to suggest the involvement of extraterrestrials or secret military experiments, adding a layer of intrigue to an already puzzling case. But for more than 50 years, these were just theories. The plane itself was gone, lost somewhere in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the Andes Mountains. Its passengers and crew, along with the answers, seemed lost forever. That is, until 1998. In an incredible twist of fate, a group of mountain climbers made a shocking discovery while trekking through the remote wilderness of Mount Tupungato, one of the highest peaks in the Andes. Scattered across the snowy slopes, they found pieces of wreckage, bits of metal, parts of an engine, and personal items long buried under layers of ice and snow. Could this be the missing stardust? Authorities believed so. However, the wreckage lay in such a dangerous and remote location that it took 2 more years before Argentine soldiers could reach the site for a full investigation. What they found was both astonishing and eerie. The freezing temperatures on the mountain had preserved the wreckage, and, incredibly, even the body parts of the passengers, frozen in time as if the crash had happened yesterday. While this discovery brought closure to the mystery of what physically happened to the stardust, many questions remained. Why did the plane crash? Investigators concluded that the crew had likely flown directly into the mountain during bad weather, unaware of their proximity to the towering Andes peaks due to a navigation error. And yet, the biggest mystery of all still lingers. What did Stendek mean? To this day, no one knows for sure. Was it a last-minute attempt by the pilot to communicate something urgent, a technical malfunction? Or could it have been a code known only to the crew? Despite the recovery of the wreckage, the mystery of stardust continues to capture the imagination of historians, aviation enthusiasts, and mystery buffs alike. The tragic loss of the plane and its passengers is now a chapter in history, but the word Stendek remains as cryptic as ever, a message frozen in time, just like the wreckage itself, waiting for an answer that may never come. It's about 2 teenage girls, Cheryl Miller and Pamela Jackson, who disappeared on their way to a party back in 1971. For decades, their story haunted their community, leaving behind nothing but questions, until an unexpected discovery more than 40 years later finally revealed the truth. It's a case that stuck with so many people, and today, we're going to dive deep into what happened. So sit tight, because this is one you won't want to miss. All right, let's rewind to May of 1971. Cheryl Miller and Pamela Jackson were just 2 teenagers living their lives in a small town in South Dakota. On May 29th, they were planning to head to a fun outdoor party near their hometown. Probably just like any of us would do with friends, but here's the thing. They never made it. When the 2 girls didn't show up at the party and no one heard from them again, their families and friends were left in a state of panic. Cheryl and Pamela seemed to have vanished into thin air. There were no leads, no clues, and despite a massive search effort, there was no sign of the girls or the 1960 Studebaker they were driving. Can you imagine the heartache their families must have felt? Days turned into weeks, then months, and eventually years. As time passed, the community held on to hope. But as you can guess, that hope slowly faded. This disappearance turned into one of South Dakota's most enduring mysteries, with everyone left wondering, what on earth happened to Cheryl and Pamela? Fast forward to September 2013, more than 40 years later. By this time, most people had given up on ever finding out what happened to the 2 girls. But then, something completely unexpected happened. South Dakota was experiencing a drought, and the water levels in the area started to drop. And here's where things get interesting. There was a creek near the town where the girls had last been seen, and the water level got so low that something that had been hidden for decades finally came into view. It was an old car, a Studebaker to be exact, lying upside down in the shallow water. And when authorities pulled the car from the creek, they couldn't believe what they found inside. It was Cheryl and Pamela's car. Still inside were the remains of the 2 girls, along with Cheryl's purse. Can you imagine the shock and sadness of the families, who had waited decades for answers? So what really happened that night in 1971? With the discovery of the car, authorities were able to piece together the tragic truth. It turns out there was no foul play, no dark conspiracy, just a heartbreaking accident. The girls were on their way to the party, driving along a rural road when somehow the driver lost control of the car. Maybe they swerved to avoid something in the road, or maybe it was just a moment of distraction. We'll never know for sure. But whatever happened, the Studebaker went off the road and into the creek, flipping upside down and trapping the girls inside. For over 40 years, the car had been sitting at the bottom of that creek, hidden from view, as their families and the community wondered where they could have gone. It's just so sad to think that for all that time, the answer was right there, hidden just beneath the water. This story really hits hard, doesn't it? It's one of those tragedies that makes you think about how fragile life can be. One wrong turn, one split-second mistake, and lives can be changed forever. It's also a reminder of how sometimes, even when it seems like all hope is lost, the truth can still come to light, even if it takes decades. What do you think about this case? Could it have been handled differently back in the 70s? Do you think today's technology would have made a difference in finding the girls sooner? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. Imagine a quiet afternoon in Chesney, South Carolina, on November 6, 2003. The Superbike Motorsports store was busy with its regular flow of customers, an ordinary day for a small town. Then, in a matter of moments, the unthinkable happened. Gunshots rang out inside the store, leaving 4 people dead. The horrific event left the community in shock, with no witnesses, no leads, and no immediate clues to point to the killer. The case baffled local authorities and left a lingering mystery that would haunt the area for years to come. Let me take you to that day. The victims, Scott Ponder, the owner of the store, his mother, Beverly Guy service manager Brian Lucas, and mechanic Chris Sherbert, were going about their routine, unaware that it would be their last. Whoever pulled the trigger left no trace, no obvious motive, and no way for police to track them down. In the blink of an eye, an entire family business was shattered, and with it, the sense of safety in this close-knit community. For over a decade, the case went cold, a haunting memory of unsolved violence. Fast forward 13 long years. It's now 2016, and the name Superbike Motorsports had faded from the headlines, though not from the hearts of those affected. But out of nowhere, a break in a seemingly unrelated case reignited the investigation. It all started when authorities began looking into the disappearance of Kayla Brown and her boyfriend, Charles David Carver. Kayla and Charles had gone missing without a trace, and their families were desperate for answers. As the investigation unfolded, police followed a lead that brought them to a 100-acre property owned by a man named Todd Kohlhepp. What they found there was beyond disturbing. Kayla Brown was discovered chained inside a metal storage container. Miraculously, she was alive. But this revelation was only the beginning of uncovering something far darker. You see, after Todd Kohlhepp was arrested, the police began digging deeper, both figuratively and literally, into his life. Not only did he confess to holding Kayla captive, but he also started to talk about crimes he had committed in the past. And one of those crimes? You guessed it. The cold-blooded murders at Superbike Motorsports back in 2003. 13 years of questions were suddenly answered when Kohlhepp admitted to being the shooter that day. In a chilling confession, he described walking into the store, pretending to be a customer, and then turning a routine visit into a massacre. Kohlhepp even claimed the victims had made fun of him when he had previously visited to buy a motorcycle, though the true motivation behind his actions remains murky at best. His confession didn't end there. Kohlhepp revealed other crimes, adding to the grim legacy of his violent spree. As you can imagine, Kohlhepp's arrest and confession rocked the community once again. The families of the Superbike victims finally had some closure after more than a decade of agony, but nothing could truly heal the wounds of that fateful day. And while Kohlhepp is now serving multiple life sentences, the chilling memories of his actions continue to loom over Chesney, a small town that will never forget the day their world was shattered. It's terrifying to think that the man responsible for such horrific acts was living among them for all those years undetected and still posing a threat. If it hadn't been for the investigation into Kayla Brown's disappearance, Kohlhepp might have continued his violent path, leaving even more destruction in his wake. Sometimes justice takes years, decades even, but when it arrives, it brings the light. In 1915, Frank was lynched in Atlanta for a crime he likely didn't commit. 2 years earlier, he had been accused of murdering 13-year-old Mary Fagan, an employee at the pencil factory he managed. Despite a lack of evidence, Frank was convicted, and many believe the trial was driven by anti-Semitism rather than facts. Even the governor of Georgia at the time, John Slayton, doubted Frank's guilt. He commuted Frank's sentence to life in prison, hoping he might one day be exonerated. But an enraged mob took matters into their own hands and lynched Frank. Years later, new evidence suggested that the real culprit was likely Jim Conley, the factory janitor who had originally pointed the finger at Frank. Yet, over a century later, Leo Frank has never been officially pardoned. It's a heartbreaking reminder of the prejudices that can pervert justice. What do you think? Should Frank be pardoned even though it's long after the fact? hunt? Next, let's jump forward a few centuries to one of the most chilling modern crime stories, the case of the Golden State Killer. This guy terrorized California in the 1970s, breaking into homes, committing horrifying acts of violence, and eluding capture for decades. Investigators had no idea they were dealing with the same person because he committed his crimes across different regions. But in 2018, after more than 40 years, the mystery was finally solved. Former police officer Joseph James D'Angelo was caught using DNA technology, but here's the kicker. It wasn't his DNA that gave him away. It was a relative who had uploaded their DNA to a genealogy website, helping investigators finally connect the dots. Justice was served, and D'Angelo was sentenced to life in prison. The use of DNA in this case is both incredible and a little controversial, right? What do you think? Should our genetic data be used to solve crimes? Let me know your thoughts below. Now let's turn to a mystery that so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps out the channel. And while you're at it, make sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss out on any of my future uploads. Also, if you know someone who'd find this video interesting, feel free to share it with them. I always appreciate your support, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.